Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Natural Hazard Research Australia's monthly Hazardous Webinar series, where we take a closer look at one of our research projects, its findings, and how it will be translated into practice, with members of the project team and the people who will use the research. My name's Nicola Moore, and I'm one of the Node Research Managers with the Centre, and I'm based in our Brisbane office. And before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge that we are all gathered from across different Aboriginal lands today. I am a guest here on Yuggera Turrbal lands in Meanjin, Brisbane, as I am wherever I walk in Australia because sovereignty has never been ceded. And I pay my respects to the Yuggera Turrbal elders, past, present and emerging, and also to any First Nations people joining us online today. These lands and waters across our country have always been places of teaching, research and learning. And First Nations people have long looked after country and cared for country as kin and continue to do so today. We can all play a key role in dismantling the ongoing processes of colonisation by supporting Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people on this journey. After all, we all share the same fundamental goal, and that is resilient and sustainable landscapes and communities, and everything in between. So thank you all for joining us today. Today's panel will be recorded, and a link to it and any presentation materials will be made available in the coming weeks. Please do let us know, though, if you're having any technical problems by adding the details into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and our team will help troubleshoot any issues with you. The questions will be answered at the end of the formal panel presentation, so please add your questions as we go along to the Q&A function and make sure you specify who your question is for, and we'll get to them in the last 15 minutes. So I'd like to introduce you to our panellists today. First of all, Brett Saroulis has been with the FLARE Wildfire Research Group at the University of Melbourne since 2013 and is very interested in fire simulations, spatial data science and remote sensing technology. Brett was part of the research and development of the PHOENIX RapidFire bushfire characterisation model, particularly the improvement of the fuel inputs through the development of a statewide fuel classification model. And Brett's dedicated to furthering our understanding of wildfire fundamentals and to improve the management of wildfire in the Australian landscape. We're really fortunate to have him with us today on our panel. We also have Paul Bentley, and Paul is an environmental engineer bridging industry and academia in the fields. He's also a member of the FLARE Wildfire Research Team, and as a bushfire risk analyst, his current research interests include developing decision support tools through the integration of risk frameworks and geospatial analytics for fire risk planning. He can be found working on a range of activities such as out collecting data in the field, programming, remote sensing, and building models. We also have Stephen Martin. Steve is actively involved in knowledge sharing, demonstrated in his involvement with various industry bodies, including the International Wildfire Risk Mitigation Consortium, with Energy Network Association, and the Utility Arboriculture Association of Australasia. Stephen is also the chair of the Queensland Fire and Biodiversity Consortium and a long-standing supporter and representative on behalf of Powerlink. As the senior strategist, land assets, research and development for Powerlink Queensland, Stephen sets policy, monitors performance, liaises with stakeholders and identifies efficiencies during periods of significant industry change. He is delighted to share some of his insights into Powerlink's fire risk management programs with us today. So a bit about today's session. With the extent, severity and frequency of bushfires increasing due to a range of factors, including climate change, in 2022, Powerlink, the Centre, and the FLARE Wildfire Research worked together to understand the potential impacts of bushfires on people, the environment, and Powerlink's electricity infrastructure. Operating in a natural hazard-prone state, Queensland's high-voltage electricity transmission network provider, Powerlink, is more used to dealing with flood and cyclone risks than fire. However, following the catastrophic fire weather conditions in 2018-19, Powerlink wanted to better understand the impact of bushfires, started by natural causes and by network assets. Powerlink also wanted to improve measurement and management of bushfire risk across its network to ensure a safer and more reliable electricity supply for its customers. So now I'd like to hand over to our panellists, starting with Brett. Over to you, Brett.
Thanks for the introduction, Nicola, and the lovely welcome to country. I'm calling in from Jaja Wurrung country. Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for calling in and to this webinar. I'm excited to share some insights from a recent case study that was conducted as an extension of the Project IGNIS work. So this case study focuses on quantifying bushfire risk in Queensland, and it's a collaborative effort between FLARE Wildfire Research Group at the University of Melbourne, and we're working closely with Natural Hazardous Research Australia and obviously Powerlink. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors on this project, Kate Parkins, Paul Bentley, Trent Penman, and Veronique Florek, who all brought their own expertise to this project. So in today's session, we will walk you through our approach to risk quantification and the models we used and how the findings can be applied more broadly. But first, just before we dive into the project, I'd like to introduce the FLARE Wildfire Research Group. So we're based at the University of Melbourne, and we focus on delivering scientific foundations to better predict and manage bushfires. So our mission is twofold. So one is predicting bushfire behaviour and impacts based on robust scientific methods. And second is to develop management strategies that both protect human communities and sustain or enhance environmental values, not just today, but in the future. So we work across several key research areas represented by the icons at the bottom. A lot of our projects are interlinked across many of these areas. So first one is fire behavior and understanding how fires spread under different conditions. We've got landscape flammability, so which areas of the landscape, or what makes some areas more prone to fires than others. Ecosystem interaction, so exploring how bushfires interact with the ecosystem, both positively and negatively. And future fires, so looking at how forecasting how changing climates and land use might alter fire patterns. From the group that myself and Paul are primarily involved in is the fire risk modelling, so building models to help governments and agencies better manage risk into the future. So although we are listed as 5 separate arms, we often work across multiple of these arms and they all inform each other in various projects. The website's at the bottom there. Feel free to have a look there and reach out to us if you want to further ask questions at a later date. So in terms of major collaborators, we have a strong long-term working relationship with a range of national and international research partners, including fire and land management agencies, institutions of higher learning, research centres and fire specialists. So this helps us build the scientific knowledge base that supports best practice of fire management through experimental fire research and ensures our research has practical outcomes for fire management. So a few of the big ones there are New South Wales, RFS, Victorian Department of Energy and Climate Action, and Government of South Australia, and all of the other education institutes in Australia, a lot of them anyway. So as well as all of those collaborators, we also work for a range of companies and separate agencies and a lot of the electricity companies in Australia doing similar projects. Bushfire risk in Queensland. So sometimes it's hard to think about fires given how much rainfall Queensland has had recently. But just to put this in perspective, so when I was putting this presentation together, I was harvesting some slides from a previous presentation that we gave to NHRA and Powerlink back in 2023. And I thought it'd be interesting to keep this one in. So back then, Australia and Queensland had just been through a few years of cooler, higher rainfall conditions as part of La Nina, which led to higher growth rates of fuels, especially grasses, creating a powder keg of conditions. So I know that's a bit dramatic, but that's from the Climate Council. And history shows that grass fires follow floods, and firefighters at the time were quite worried about the spring of 2023 and the summer of 2023-2024 in terms of extreme fire, increased fire danger. So now we're in 2024 5, how did this play out? So I got this quote from a recent report. Not only are fires are more dangerous in Queensland now, they're also less predictable. Last year was the state's most destructive fire season on record, with more than 1,000 blazes burning in October 2023. The town of Tara, Western Downs, lost 59 homes to fires, which is more lost than the whole state during the Black Summer fires, so 2018 to 2020. I thought that was quite interesting. And with Queensland being such a diverse landscape, we also saw fires in the 2024-2025 season, even given the higher rainfall than expected, which isn't abnormal for these drier, arid regions. So bushfires are very diverse across Queensland, and each year you're pretty much guaranteed to get fires somewhere there. But increasingly in the southeastern areas are becoming more and more frequent and of higher intensities. So a bit of a history on the bushfire risk modelling in Australia. So bushfire risk modelling has constantly evolved and improved, particularly following large-scale fire events. So each major fire event, such as Black Saturday or Black Summer, has driven step changes in how we model risk. So in the early days, around 2011, we were largely focused on worst-case scenarios. So this is post-Black Saturday fires, modelling house loss only. So models like PHOENIX were still used, but they were in early development, and specialist computing was needed, and risk assessments were mostly agency driven. And they were centered around this concept that was called residual risk, which basically the difference between, or the risk that remains after certain actions are taken. So management strategies were implemented, so how much impact did they have on their risk predictions. So as we move forward, we entered the development phase. So we introduced gridded ignition approaches, so simulating fire starts across the landscape rather than a single ignition point. And these early models typically still used single weather scenarios and early iterations of the fuel models. Today, we're seeing much more sophisticated probabilistic approaches. So we've got weighted ignition approaches that are now standard. Fires don't start randomly, and models reflect that. We model multiple assets and not just houses, which has been a huge improvement, and we'll go into more detail on that. And now we're using dynamic weather inputs like forest fire danger or FFDI and other drivers to provide a more realistic spread of fire behaviour predictions. And I guess a note on cloud computing has become a huge thing in that period of time, and in-house capabilities have also improved. Computers are much faster and allows us to do a lot more simulations in a reasonable time than ever before. So introducing Project IGNIS. So this is before we dive into the current case study, it's important to understand the background. So in 2019, Project IGNIS was set out to develop and test a standardized methodology for assessing the tangible and intangible impacts of major bushfires on energy networks. So it combined fire simulations, economic impact assessments, and decision analysis. And we use Bayesian networks to do this, to model the complex outcomes of catastrophic bushfires. So the work from Project IGNIS provided the foundation for this new extension work that we're presenting today, specifically applying it and adapting that approach to the Queensland context, in particular the transmission lines of Powerlink. The study aimed to do two things. So firstly, the first aim was to improve the scientific understanding of risk posed by bushfires to the Powerlink transmission network. And secondly, to guide decision-making on bushfire risk mitigation for the power transmission network. So this was done in two ways. We looked at it from two sides. So we looked at annualized loss from the transmission network. And this is defined as a potential impact that could result from an ignition originating from the structure of a structure or a pole on the network. And in this approach, areas of the network which pose the highest risk to human and environmental assets are identified. The impacts on various assets, including houses, human lives, agriculture, environment, and infrastructure, are also assessed in this. Secondly, we looked at annualized loss to the power transmission network. This was characterized as the likelihood of a bushfire occurring in the landscape surrounding the power line network, and leading to damage or loss of the network. So in this approach, the areas of network likely to experience the greatest impacts for the bushfires was identified. So back to Project IGNIS. So in terms of a model, a brief model overview, and I'll dive into more detail on each of these steps to give a detailed description of the method that we followed. So this is the conceptual flow of the IGNIS model, and the first step-by-step process integrates fire behavior, asset vulnerability, and risk characterization to a unified framework. So we begin with the landscape setting, and this is where we pull together base data like vegetation, topography, land use, along with weather, ignition likelihood, and in some cases, climate projections. And this sets the scene how fire might behave under different conditions. So these all go into a fire simulator. In this case, we've used PHOENIX to do this, but I guess it's important to flag here that Australia is moving into a new fire model in the future called Spark, and this whole process is simulator agnostic. So that the only step is that we use the simulation for is to get the fire behavior metrics, and the rest of it is external to the simulator. That's always a question that comes up, so I always describe it there. So the next stage is once we have these fire behavior metrics out of PHOENIX, and these include things like rate of spread, flame heights, intensities, that kind of thing. They all go into the next step, which is assets. So we lay the assets, including energy infrastructure, communities, environmental values. Each asset has a fire response or impact function, and then we predict not just something will burn, but what the consequences, what the impact would be, or the consequences would be. I'll go into more details about that shortly. So all of this, finally, it all goes into a Bayesian network as the last step, and this helps us to characterize risk and not just consequence. So this allows for scenario analysis, but more importantly, it allows us to bring in likelihoods of ignitions and weather. So it has a bit more detail. This is the study region that we used in this, that was covered in this project. So this is the entire extent of the Powerlink transmission network, and two proposed transmission extension lines called GenX and McIntyre, highlighted in the orange down the bottom and blue in the top. For the fuel, just briefly, how we capture fuel in PHOENIX, each location in the landscape is given an ID. And from that ID, we have the different layers or strata of fuel. So we have surface, elevated, and bark fuel. What we also have there is how that fuel accumulates over time. So one of the things that we looked at here was the current setting, so which considers fire history, which is essentially giving each location a time since fire, which places the fuel somewhere on this curve. For the maximum risk setting, this is where we assume that fuel load has reached steady state. So at the top of this curve, and fuel is essentially set to maximum values. We also include things like topography. Not much to explain here. It's just an elevation map, very important for fire behavior. This is the fire history data, or the time since fire data that goes into it. You can see quite significant fire history, a lot up in the northern areas of Queensland, less so down in the southern. For the ignitions, there was two approaches, as I mentioned before. So we've got the network ignition locations to look at risk from the network, and these were at each pole location 1 kilometre along the network, or they might have been they are at every pole location on the network. And the landscape ignitions were a 2 kilometre grid buffered to 50 kilometres to the network. For weather, this is often a point of confusion, so we'll try to explain this as simple as I can, but feel free to ask questions on this one during the discussion. So essentially, we start with a thing called FFDI, so Forest Fire Danger Index, which is a composite measure of temperature, RH, and wind speed. And this is broken down into the 6 classes, so from low to catastrophic. So we know one of the important things that we know that FFDI can be high because of either one of temperature or relative humidity, they're related, and wind speed. So we sampled days with both high temperatures, days with strong winds. And just to be sure that we're capturing the worst weather days, a common thing in Australia with fire behaviour is that we get strong wind changes, which dramatically increase fire spread when the fires blow out on the flanks. So we wanted to capture that weather in there. So we've got the strong winds plus a significant directional change. At each ignition location, we sample from the 3 closest AWS stations. And that's how we do the sampling. I'll come back to this plot a bit later, but this is a way that we can look at the data. Although we have all of the FFDI category, we sample across all of FFDI categories. Some areas we don't have those extreme and catastrophic days to sample from. So it's not always, we don't force fires in those locations. So now we've got potentially up to 18 weathers. So 6 FFDIs times 3 drivers makes 18 weathers. And we've got 66,000 ignition locations. That's including gridded ignitions and pole ignitions. Roughly 1.3 million fires in the landscape. This is an example of what is happening in the background. So on the left is an example of a grass fire. Color indicates flame heights in this case. And so we've got relatively low flame heights, quite fast spread. And this is a fire near Wagga. On the right is a fire in New South Wales near Port Macquarie. Again, colour represents flame height, but you can see the red dots there, which is spotting fire behaviour. So it's one of the important drivers in fires in Australia is spotting. So that's what happens 1.3 million times behind the scenes. So from there we have fire behaviour. So we have and therefore we can get asset exposure. So we know where the assets are. We know what the fire behaviour was for each of those simulations. We can combine that with asset vulnerability to give us asset impacts. And how we do that is is a number of different ways. It's either through empirical equations, so house loss or life loss, we do that way, and they look at ember density, convection, intensity in an equation to give us life loss, to give us house loss, and that informs life loss as well. We also implement these what we like to call loss functions or loss curves. There's an example of that on the right, which I'll go through in a second. So the history of them is that they were developed in collaboration with the New South Wales RFS, and these loss functions are matched to the spatial outputs, as I mentioned. But the important thing about them is they were done in an expert elicitation approach, held in workshops across the state, and they were looking at multiple different assets. And I think they're up to, I think there's 50 odd assets now that they've done these curves for. So just going over the curve on the right, excuse the probability going from 0 to 20, it should be 0 to 1. So what that's saying is that if we look at the blue line, which is the probability of destruction, along the x-axis, we've got increasing fire behavior. So we've got from smoke on the left all the way up to flames greater than 10 meters. So as you can see, as fire behavior increases, the probability of the asset being destroyed is higher. And we've also captured minor damage and major damage as well in the same way. So from there, we worked with Veronique Florek she's an adjunct at University of Western Australia. And she did a fantastic job at spatializing the value of each of these assets across the entire state. So we have, so from there, we were able to get essentially for every single fire ignition, we were able to get the dollar impact on for every single fire. So if we just stopped there, we could average those results and get a dollar value. However, we know that we sampled across the entire distribution of FFDIs. We know, according to this data here, that the likelihood of those that weather occurring is different depending on where you are and what category FFDI you're looking at. So as an example, this top one, Mariba Airport, we've got 82% of days of fire season days are in low FFDI. So what we need to do, and going down to 0.3% in severe days. So what we need to do is incorporate those probabilities, and we do that in a Bayesian network framework. So we adjust for at every ignition location to give us an expected value from the Bayesian network, which is accounting for that variation in weather likelihoods. We call this annualized risk. So going into the results now, this is the ignition locations along the network likely to cause the largest annual area burnt should a fire occur. So this is just looking at that raw fire behavior output, and we're not looking at asset impacts here. This is looking at all of the FFDI categories. This indicates where high impact ignitions may originate from and can be used to inform risk management and mitigation activities from the transmission network. You can see the highest points are in these locations. Those high points don't necessarily, once we calculate annualized cost by assigning those dollar values for each asset type and summing them together, they don't necessarily correlate to where the highest area burnt or hectares burnt is. So we see this quite different alignment here. We can also look at annualized loss to the network. So this is from the gridded ignitions, and this is looking at where fires from the landscape are going to impact, which parts of the networks are going to be most vulnerable to landscape fires. So what were the key findings, the summary of the findings? So annual area burnt was greatest around Townsville and Gladstone compared to the greater Brisbane region. These regions correlate with areas of urban settlements and higher housing density and hence power line density. The higher risk areas occur where complex urban interface exists in a topographically diverse and landscape covered with fire-prone vegetation. So higher risk locations were also present in the far west of the network, northwest of Brisbane and northwest of Rockhampton. So ignitions that resulted in the greatest annual area burnt did not often correlate with the areas of highest annualized cost. In general, ignitions near population centres result in fires with higher annualized cost, as the cost of assets such as housing and human lives significantly increase the calculation of annualized cost. So this is consistent with the work, I'm sure a lot of people have heard the term of wildland urban interface, or WUI. So generally, fires have the most impact where urban settlements meet complex forested environments, where fire behavior can interact quite strongly with as human assets. So the highest probability of loss to the network was found to occur in the coastal and highly urbanized regions around Brisbane and Rockhampton. And these areas of high risk may be in part explained by the presence of forested regions to the west of both locations. And that's consistent with what the explanation for that is. The predominant fire weather comes from the west. In this case, the more catastrophic the fire weather, the more likely it is to come from the west. Ignitions occurring in these more forested parts of the landscape may result in larger fires that could rapidly impact the network. The information will be useful for guiding the future fire risk mitigation efforts along the Powerlink network. This is where I was going to jump across to Stephen to go through so that's all the key findings. I'll jump over to Stephen now to talk about how they've used the results and what they've used them for.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks again for your great work and laying it out in a logical and concise manner. I see in the chat there's also a link to the hazard note that NHRA have pulled together, which I guess nicely summarises the slide deck that you've prepared, Brett. So yeah, there's something for people to refer to. And Powerlink's been happy to, I guess, share those results in a not in a granular manner. So the analysis that Brett and the research team pulled together has provided us at a span level. So we manage risk across our network at a span level, and we vary our treatments at that level so that we can cost effectively manage our assets. So at one span, maybe the risk dollars justifies some investment, and another span doesn't. So and then we look at how do we, I guess, most efficiently and effectively manage those risks. So I guess just to put it in context, for Powerlink, we're a transmission entity operating in Queensland, and this research body of research has provided us with an opportunity to achieve step change in our fire risk management across the business, and standing on the shoulders of the great work that was performed with ENA and predecessor to NHRA, the Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC. So which was the Project IGNIS methodology. So we approached NHRA to do a direct engagement rather than through ENA to look at our overall network risk, and I think the body of work that's been performed has been transformational for us as a business to understand the risk dollars, albeit the likelihood for us in Queensland is lower. So you're looking at a transmissions less likely than say other types of assets, because our assets are designed to be more resilient, and that includes fire. So we've got steel structures, we've got engineered to withstand flood and winds, and I think as a state, our ability to understand the consequences and quantifying the risk dollars for bushfire wasn't at the same level prior to this body of work as say for wind and flood. So this has really provided a platform for us to understand and plug into our prioritisation and investment on our assets to ensure that we're providing the best value to our Queensland customers. So as far as the methodology, it's provided us with a nationally consistent method. So we have low rates of fire starts from our network. We have relatively low rates of fires impacting our network, and we work with stakeholders to try and drive those outcomes even further down. But with climate change and the events that we witnessed in November of 2018 and 2019, it was clear that the likelihood was on an upward trend for bushfire in Queensland. And while we've only realised very low consequences to date over the last 50 or more years, there's an upward trend, and we needed to make sure that we're applying a rigorous methodology to our investment strategies to ensure that, one, we're not starting fires, and two, we're doing what we can to mitigate fires impacting our network. So as far as working with other stakeholders, we've part of this engagement included ensuring that we work with state agencies like the Queensland Fire Department, and we've sharing data with those state agencies and working out how different analysis comes up with different risk quantifications and what that means for various programs. It provides us with quantifiable economic impacts that we can feed into planned burn programs, and we've subsequently developed planned burn advice processes at Powerlink so that we can work with stakeholders more to do planned burns at a landscape level safely. And to that end, we've been active members of the Queensland Fire and Biodiversity Consortium for many years, which is part of the Healthy Land and Water program of works. And we work with them to disseminate, I guess, the learnings from this research and our planned burns at a landscape level to ensure that this research translates onto the ground, that it's not just theoretical, that it's informing our decision making and our partnership approach with state agencies and landholders to introduce good fire, as First Nations people have done for millennia, to reduce the risk for our communities, Queensland communities, at a landscape level. We've also continued to build on this body of work with other research partners. So we've got a strategic relationship with the Bureau of Meteorology, and their insights and I guess suite of data sets and services that they provide to everyone nationally. We certainly have continued to work with them around all natural hazards and weather data sets that we can feed into our asset management and investment decision making as best we can, and continue to improve over time. As far as where to from now, the body of research identified that because of our low frequency of actual fire starts, that we based on our data sets, we don't have a clear picture on the fault rates and I guess the fire start data. So we've tried to work with others nationally to fill in that picture, but then potentially that doesn't translate across to our transmission network. So it's a bit of a wicked problem that we're still working through with our colleagues nationally. We're also part of international consortium, the IWRMC, International Wildfire Risk Mitigation Consortium, and we're benchmarking and sharing information through those channels to make sure that we're getting a clearer picture of potential faults, even if we haven't experienced them in Queensland or Australia, but they have been experienced elsewhere internationally, to make sure that we've got as complete a picture of our fire risk threats and investment decision making and asset management. So I think that's sort of the context that I wanted to provide as an end user of the great work that Brett and Paul and others at FLARE have provided and facilitated and coordinated through NHRA. So back to you, Nicola. Thank you.
Good on you, Steve. Thank you very much. Really interesting to hear how you're using this work and how you're also using it to share with other key entities operating within the space around fire management, wildfire management. We've got a couple of questions that have come through online, so I think we might go to them first. Naomi has noted really interesting work. She wanted to ask if it's possible to get more information about how the values were calculated for each category used to assess cost and what the values are. I might hand that over to Brett. Are you able to address that one at all?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that in a whole lot of detail. The Veronique Florek was the one that led that side of the work. She's an economist from University of WA, as I mentioned. So she used various approaches using Bureau of Statistics data, aligning that with spatial areas, spatial like LGA-based data, and looking at the cost of commercial buildings, houses, all sorts of things. There's potential. I'm not too sure how much information we've included in the hazard note of that, but we could potentially provide a summary of how that was calculated as a separate document once we get in touch with Vero.
Okay. So Naomi, we'll keep you posted. Hopefully we've got your contact details and we'll be able to follow up a little bit more on that. Good on you, Brett. Thank you. We've also got a question from John Bates, formerly with us at NHRA. John's asking Steve, what did you need to do to get buy-in and commitment from your leadership team to embrace this new approach to managing network risk from fire? Steve?
Yeah, so change management is always an important part of making sure the rubber hits the road, and I guess that was part of the design of having it at a span level. So that's how we manage our assets. So if, at least I knew that if we have the data sets in a format that we ingest and manage risk more broadly, whether it's flood, fire, wind, whatever. Whatever the hazard or potential risk, it was going to be easier for us to plug into our asset management and investment decision making. So I guess by design, it made it easier, and the buy-in, I guess, was part of the business case around the weather at November 2018 and 2019 that. Based on science, we can expect more of that to be occurring into the future. So while we haven't experienced catastrophic economic outcomes in Queensland from our electricity networks more broadly, its possibilities increasing, and we need to be diligent and prudent in the way we plug in. So yeah, a good business case and having the data sets fit for purpose to ingest into our systems, I guess. Carla?
That's great. Thank you. And another one for you, Steve, from Mick Emmett. Has this research resulted in any increased funding through pricing determinations or more of a redistribution of current funding based on revised risk?
Yeah, more the latter for us, Mick. So because flood and wind are more likely to be an issue for us in Queensland. We couldn't just plug in fire as a trump to those other risks. It just forms part of our risk profile, and at least now we have something that's rigorous to inform our broader investment decision making. So that's the approach we've taken to date, Mick.
Good on you. One from Matt K to Brett. Very fascinating, thank you. Matt's wondering if you had any plans to change your use of the FFDI to the newer FDI, and he imagines it may be difficult to do that.
Thanks, Matt. Very difficult to do, but we're doing it. We're currently finalising that. So for those that don't know, FDI or FBI, so Fire Behaviour Index, is based on the CSIRO fire models. They're in a document. So what the difference there is that is now essentially spatialised. So Fire Behaviour Index is no longer just linked to weather conditions. It's also linked to fire behaviour model at that location. So yeah, it's been quite the complex process to do that, and we've aligned it with the Bureau of Meteorology's BARA 2 product, so climate reanalysis product, over the last 30 years. And so we're moving into a world where we're trialling gridded ignition approaches with this to more accurately capture both FBI and spatial weather patterns in future runs.
And we've got one for you also from Matt Mason at UQ. You mentioned loss functions developed in collaboration with New South Wales Rural Fire Service. Are there papers or documents describing these functions and the methodology to develop them? He's previously tried to find them but not had any luck.
Yeah, unfortunately no papers yet. Soon there will be papers on it. We're just finalising a project with the New South Wales RFS where we've looked at I guess pub testing not pub testing, but checking these loss curves and how they've performed over the 2019-2020 fire season, looking at actual loss numbers. So there's been a process looking at that. But yeah, we are in the process of publishing both the original methodology for coming up with the loss curves and the review. So it'll be sometime this year.
Okay. Tom Duff has asked a question as well. Has there been work looking at the fire risk of the lower voltage power lines, i.e. power lines rather than transmission pylons?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. We've worked with Essential Energy, Endeavour Energy, Ausgrid in New South Wales, and we're currently doing another project with them that's kicking off now. And we've also, so that's capturing risk across their entire network. We've also we've had a separate project looking at ignition risk based on asset type. So what we did, well, we looked at essentially breaking down the power line network into voltage class. So yeah, we've looked across the whole range of that.
It's interesting. You're continuing to look at different aspects and different variables. John's asked if you could add another metric to improve the outcome of this research. Outcomes from this approach, what would it be if you could add another metric?
Yeah, one single metric.
What would be your favourite one? What's your priority one that you'd like to add?
I think it's rather than adding. We know that house loss is the primary driver currently. I think there has been work done in the past few years by Tom Duff actually as well. So looking at improving house loss, capturing house loss using different equations and models. So I think that's probably the best space for improving loss predictions in these risk runs is looking at house loss to start with, improving that model.
Okay. And we've got one from Joseph Mitchell. Great crop of questions, folks. Do you see an increase in faults or ignitions during periods of high winds? And if so, do you incorporate the increased probability of ignition during fire weather into your risk models?
Yes, so that's another, I didn't go through that in detail in the presentation, but so we look at historical ignitions and look at FFDI at those time of those ignitions, and that informs it goes into the Bayesian network and links with the likelihood of the weather occurring. So you've got both likelihood of weather and likelihood of having an ignition on that weather, both incorporated into that. But not specific, sorry, to refer to the question, not specifically wind speed, we look at FFDI in that case.
Okay, yeah. It's interesting because this project and this work draws on data sources from a range of different areas, I suppose, and a range of different entities, so that you're pulling data from heaps of what would you call them? Co-collaborators, stakeholders, entities.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess our primary source is state agencies here, so we like to align all of our models with state agencies and collaborate with them on a lot of things. And I think that's an important, and it has become I think it's a good differentiator between how we do things in Australia versus how the US does things. The state agencies drive a lot of the risk models, and we think it's really important to align with their modelling as well in anything we do. So they're the primary source, and that's including the Bureau of Meteorology and people like RFS or DECA. So.
Yeah, and I know for this project we certainly drew on some data from Queensland Fire Department as well, which was great. Yeah. A question from Philip. In PHOENIX, how does the simulation of fire propagation ultimately stop?
Apologies, Philip. I should have covered that in the presentation. So we simulate 12 hours of fires. So we're only looking at those single day runs. So we start at 10 a.m. and finish at 10 p.m. So the reason why we don't simulate longer than that is fire behavior models don't do too well overnight. There's a lot of issues with them spreading overnight. And yeah, so and in history, the most damaging fires occur in the first day. So that's why we do it that way.
And just a final question for wrap up. Where to from here? And what are the future improvements in the works to build on IGNIS and the work done with Powerlink in Queensland? You've touched on aspects, but as a roundup, Brett and Steve and Paul.
I'll just share the presentation again because we've got a couple of slides on that. Paul, if you want to talk to that.
So as Brett mentioned, we're currently working in New South Wales, both with Transgrid and also with the distribution network providers as well, Ausgrid, Endeavour and Essential. And as part of that, we're implementing, I guess, several updates to different parts of this overall framework. So as was mentioned earlier, it's quite modular in the way that we've put it together. And the reason for that is because it allows us the flexibility to update and bring in improvements either through the work that we're doing with energy network companies themselves, or from other projects which are happening in parallel, such as with RFS or down in Victoria as well. So the updates that we are currently either implementing at the moment or we're in the process of setting it up to implement and we'll have ready this year, I imagine, is first of all, there's an extended set of asset loss curves, which is being developed by RFS. And they've done that as part of their BFMC process. And we're taking, or we're going through a process of looking at which ones we can actually take and then apply to this type of modeling itself. Another one is the move towards a probabilistic landscape ignition model. So at the moment, it was just done with a gridded model across the landscape, but now we're actually looking at where ignitions are more likely to occur in the landscape, such as lightning on ridges or ignitions near urban communities as well, to get a better appreciation of where fires in the landscape are more likely to occur. As mentioned, we're moving towards the Fire Behaviour Index and implementing that using the Barrow 2 gridded weathery analysis, which we have to do a fair bit of hindcast modeling to actually calculate FBI back through time so that we can then select the weather streams that we want, categorize them, and then build them into the risk model. So there's a bit of work going on with that, but we're making good progress. Another one is the suppression scenarios. So having a look with and without suppression in the actual models itself. And that factors into, or with the suppression scenario, we're factoring in the distance to where resources might be located in the landscape and the likelihood and the timing as well of them being able to make it to ignitions along the networks, and then sort of comparing the before and after for that. Fuel scenarios, looking at how modifications to fuel, either through management or mostly through management scenarios, and then seeing how that influences fire risk. And this is sort of looking and recognizing that companies have the option to, I guess, manage fuel within their corridors and along their networks. And that in itself can influence how fire propagates and propagates across the landscape. The other ones we're looking at as well are climate scenarios. So being able to quantify risk in the current setting, but also under a range of different climate pathways, how those risk profiles along networks might change into the future. And further later into this year, we'll also be having a look at updating the house loss and life loss equations as well, and factoring that into and feeding that into our risk analysis and calculations.
Really, really important work, and great to see that it's going to continue on and that you're adding and adding to it. And I'd like to thank Paul, Brett and Steve for taking the time to share their work and answer our questions today. Also, thank you to everyone who's joined us online and for submitting questions for the panel to discuss. We're also really excited for the Natural Hazards Research Forum this year in Adelaide from the 18th to the 20th of June. There's a real good chance we're going to reach capacity and basically fill up. So we'd love you to be part of the discussions. If you're keen on attending, registrations are open via our website. And for updates of everything Natural Hazards Research Australia, please sign up to our newsletter and follow us on social media. A great session today. Thank you, gentlemen. Really, really useful and really, really valuable work. And obviously a lot of interest given the number of participants we had online today. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.